Hey there, this video is going to be about target 2, which is angles in standard position and also coterminal angles. You should be looking at this paper in front of you and be ready to fill this out. I made mine a little larger for the smartboard. So when we're sketching an angle in standard position, first you want to draw your x and y axes. And all angles start right here, which is at 0 degrees, and positive angles open in a counterclockwise direction, which is this way. It's helpful to kind of break up our degrees, so we know that from 0 to right here, that's 90 degrees. And then our second quadrant, this is our second quadrant, first quadrant. Our second quadrant takes us from 90 degrees to 180. Our third quadrant takes us from 180 to 270. And then our fourth quadrant takes us from 270 back up to 360. So if we're trying to graph 150 degrees, we know that that's in quadrant 2, somewhere between 90 and 180, closer to 180. And again, we're just sketching here. We're not getting out our protractor. So again, it starts here, which is called our initial side, and then goes all the way to here, which is called our terminal side. Remember, angles are made up of two sides. Okay, so that would be graphing the angle 150 degrees in standard position. So if we go on to angle 315, we will start out the same way. And again, oops. Oh yeah, that's why. And then we will kind of mark down our key measurements to make it easier. So 315 would be here in quadrant 4. But what we have to think about is that it starts here and opens all the way up to here. Okay. If we are graphing a negative angle, then we are going to go in the opposite direction, which would be clockwise. So our initial side still starts at 0, right here. But then you could think of this as negative 90, because we're going this way, and negative 180. So if we're looking for negative 210, that would be 30 degrees further than negative 180. So this is actually 30 right here. And our angle itself goes all the way from our initial side all the way to here. All right. And then if we're graphing 400 degrees, so that's more than 360. So that's more than once around. If we start at 0, if we think about going once around, that takes us up to 360. So how much is left between 360 and 400? 40 degrees. So we would have to go 40 degrees further to get to 400. So this right here is 40. But again, we started at 0, went all the way around, and then 40 degrees further. So that's an example right there. The angles 40 and 400 both start and end in the same place. They don't have the same measure, but they do have the same terminal side. And angles that have the same terminal side are called coterminal angles. Make sure you write that down. So if they start and end in the same place, they are called coterminal. They're not necessarily the same measure, but they have the same terminal side. So two examples we actually saw right there were 40 and 400. And again, those are called coterminal. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but in the negative 210 angle, that ended in the same place as 150. So that was another example we have already seen. So go ahead and take a minute on your paper and see if you can draw two angles in standard position that are coterminal with 30 degrees. Go ahead and do that. So if you're kind of stuck, you could compare it to what we saw with the 40-degree angle, where if we went all the way around the circle and then back up to 40, we were able to compare 40 and 400 and that they had the same coterminal, same terminal side. So if we think about that, 30 degrees would be right here in quadrant 1. So how could we get another angle that would end in that same spot? Well, either we could go in the negative direction, which would be the same as negative 330, or you could go another lap around the circle, which is the same as adding 360 to our angle. So that would give us 390. Okay, so basically to find coterminal angles, you can add or subtract 360 degrees. Once we get to radians later in this unit, then it would be adding or subtracting 2 pi instead of 360. So let's try a couple. For these ones, they did give us a parameter. It says find the measure of an angle between 0 and 360. So we want to make sure that our angle is between 0 and 360. Since 500 is above 360, we will subtract 360. And that gives us 140. So what we're saying is that 140 and 500 both end in the same place. Our next example is negative, and since we want our answer to be between 0 and 360, we're going to add 360. And that gives us 280. Our last example is higher than 360, clearly, but when we subtract 360, we're still over the 360 that we want. So in that case, we will subtract 360 again. And we're left with 40. And that is angles in standard position and coterminal angles. Make sure that if you have any questions on this video that you write down your questions on your paper and be ready to ask your teacher tomorrow in class.